It is a strange and almost blasphemous thing to say in polite company that suffering, the very thing we try so desperately to escape, is secretly what many seek, and not in the noble sense, not in the crucible of transformation where the soul burns away its dross and is refined, but in the compulsive, unconscious way that an addict returns to the familiar torment of their substance. I tell you now, as if whispering into the darkened chamber of your soul, that most empaths, those sensitive, porous vessels who feel the world more deeply than others, are not simply wounded, they are entangled. They are unconsciously addicted to suffering because it is the only language their inner child ever knew. But let us not speak with condemnation, for the psyche does not operate under the laws of logic or morality. It operates by necessity, by archetype, by the great river of the collective unconscious that flows beneath the fragile constructs of persona. The empath, this divine creature whose nervous system is tuned to the subtle frequency of others' anguish, is often the child of chaos, born into households where love was inconsistent, where emotion was weaponized, where boundaries were never modeled, and where the only way to survive was to attune, to feel what others were feeling, to preempt the next explosion, to soothe the storm before it ever arrived. This adaptation, though tragic, is brilliant. The infant psyche, infinitely adaptive, discovered that to merge with the emotional body of the other was to increase the chances of survival. And so began the training, the soul conditioning, the silent oath. If I feel it for you, maybe you won't hurt me. This is not love. This is not compassion. This is early psychological bondage, the binding of self-worth to the act of absorbing pain. Thus, the seed of suffering was planted, and in time it grew into identity. I have observed this in dreams in countless patients who have wept in my consultation room, wondering why they are always exhausted, always giving, always drawn to the broken and the bleeding. Their dreams betray them. In the symbols of their night visions, we see the archetype of the wounded healer, Chiron, who bears a wound that will never fully close, but beneath that is a martyr. And deeper still, the masochist, not in the erotic sense, but in the soul sense, where pain becomes proof of purpose. And here lies the danger, for if pain is your proof, then peace will feel like a betrayal. Imagine that. Imagine a soul so conditioned to turmoil that silence feels threatening, that stillness feels like abandonment. This is not melodrama, this is neurosis. The empath who is addicted to suffering will find ways to sabotage joy, to mistrust kindness, to gravitate toward the emotionally unavailable, because they confuse intensity with intimacy. They think they are choosing love, but in truth, they are choosing what is familiar, and what is familiar is pain. Let us speak more directly. Most empaths do not actually know themselves. They know the echoes of others within them. They are not anchored in a self that is sovereign, differentiated, integrated. They are often a mosaic of other people's needs, dreams, emotions, traumas. They wear masks that they do not know are masks, and beneath them lies not deception, but an empty center a self that was never allowed to form fully because it was too busy performing the function of an emotional sponge. This is not an accusation. This is an invitation for you who hear my voice and feel a tremor in your bones. Perhaps this message is not just philosophical, it is personal. You have likely been called too sensitive, praised for your compassion, burdened with the task of always understanding, always forgiving. But who has understood you? Who has held your ache with the same reverence you offer to others? Who has sat with your silence without demanding your smile? The unconscious does not lie. It speaks in patterns, and if the pattern of your life is one of emotional depletion, of constant giving without receiving, of rescuing others while drowning silently yourself, then the pattern is your teacher. Look not at what you say you want, look at what you repeatedly choose. This is where your shadow hides. The shadow, yes, that great beast who follows us in the sunlight of our consciousness. For the empath, the shadow is not rage or greed. It is self-love. It is healthy selfishness. It is boundaries. It is the audacity to say no. And so the empath suppresses these traits, casts them into the basement of the psyche. And what emerges is a persona of saintly suffering. But make no mistake, this is not enlightenment. This is enmeshment with archetypal suffering. It is addiction disguised as virtue. In myth, we find the empath represented in many forms, the wounded oracle, the sacrificial priestess, the selfless healer. But the danger in these archetypes is the lack of reciprocity. The healer who bleeds for others eventually collapses. The oracle who sees others' pain but never addresses her own goes blind. The priestess who sacrifices everything loses her humanity. These are not metaphors, they are psychological truths. And in the modern empath, these myths are played out in neuroses, autoimmune disorder, burnout, and cycles of toxic relationships. Now, let us move into the subterranean cavern of the soul and speak plainly. If you are addicted to suffering, it is because, on some level, suffering has given you a role. It has made you feel needed. It has anchored your worth in usefulness. And the idea of not suffering, of simply being, is terrifying, because who are you if you are not saving someone? I have known this terror in the silent hours of the night. I too have wondered whether my value was tied to what I could perceive in others, what I could heal, what I could decode from their dreams. And I have seen that this is a shadow masquerading as purpose. The true self, the one that is whole, radiant, sovereign, does not need suffering to validate its existence. It knows that being is enough, but to arrive at this knowing, one must undergo the great descent, not into suffering, but into the wound that birthed it. You must trace the thread of your compassion to its origin. Was it born from love, or was it born from fear? Did you learn to help because it felt good, or because you were punished? If you didn't, did you become sensitive because you were nurtured in safety, or because you were trained in vigilance? The soul remembers, even if the mind does not. The body remembers, too, the tension in your gut when someone raises their voice, the compulsion to fix someone else's discomfort before they even speak, The guilt that arises when you put yourself first, these are not random. These are echoes of an ancient contract you made when you were too young to understand what you were agreeing to. And that contract must now be broken, but you cannot break what you have not named. So let me name it for you. Most empaths are addicts not to drugs or alcohol, but to suffering, to identity through pain, to the illusion of control through caretaking. They are addicted to intensity, to the highs and lows of chaotic relationships, because those relationships mirror their early environment. They are loyal to their trauma, married to their emotional roles, and terrified of who they might become without them. And yet, that is precisely where freedom lives. You must enter the abyss not to drown in it, but to see clearly. You must meet the child within you who believed that love must be earned through sacrifice. You must hold her hand and say, you don't have to do that anymore. You must call back your shadow, reclaim your boundaries, and allow the sacred anger that has been buried beneath years of passivity to rise, not to destroy, but to protect. There is a fire in the empath that has been smothered by guilt. I say to you, let it burn. Not the world, but the illusions. Burn the belief that your worth is measured by your suffering. Burn the lie that your sensitivity is weakness. Burn the mask of perfection. And in the ash, find yourself. Not the empathic chameleon who bends for everyone, but the wild, holy being who feels deeply and yet belongs to herself. You were never meant to carry everyone else's pain. You were meant to witness, not to absorb. You were meant to love, not to self-abandon. You were meant to feel, yes, but not to be consumed. There is a difference between compassion and codependence, and that line is drawn by boundaries. If you do not have boundaries, you do not have a self. You only have reaction. And so I ask you now, not as a philosopher, but as a fellow traveler, are you ready to stop suffering? Are you willing to disappoint those who benefit from your lack of boundaries? Are you prepared to meet the self you buried beneath everyone else's needs? This is the first step. You see, to cease suffering does not mean to become hard. It does not mean you shut the gates of the heart and retreat into the cold mountains of detachment. No, this is not the path of individuation. True individuation is not a rejection of feeling, it is the refinement of it. It is to differentiate your soul's pain from that which was grafted onto you by your parents, your lovers, your friends, your ancestors, your culture. It is to draw a line in the invisible realm and declare, this sorrow is not mine to carry. But oh, how fiercely the empath resists this, because what remains when all that is not yours falls away? There is a silence, a spaciousness, and for many it is unbearable. We fear it more than we fear chaos, because within that silence lives your unmet self, the one you abandoned in favor of being liked, the one you buried beneath niceness, the one you sacrificed on the altar of approval. You see, the empath often becomes a master of emotional alchemy. You know how to transmute another's pain into comfort. You offer balm, you hold space, you anticipate, and you believe this is love. But if we look more closely through the archetypal lens, what we find is the pattern of the Savior. And behind the Savior is the unacknowledged fear of being invisible, if not useful. This is how suffering becomes identity. If you are not helping, you are nothing. If you are not healing someone, you are lost. If you are not suffering, you are unrecognizable to yourself. And so many empaths sabotage their own joy. Not consciously, of course, but in subtle, nearly imperceptible ways. You withhold your needs in a relationship, then resent that they are unmet. You gravitate toward those who need fixing and mistake their dependence for devotion. You distrust peace when it arrives. You feel restless in the presence of ease. And so you stir the waters unconsciously, inviting a storm just to feel something again. This is not madness. This is a soul trying to replicate the conditions it was formed in. The psyche is a pattern-seeking organ. It does not desire health. It desires familiarity. The wound that goes unexamined becomes a magnet, pulling you into the same story over and over again. Different faces, some dynamique, different cities, same ache, different year, same dream, until you pause, until you look, and that is what we are doing now together. Look at your life. Look at the trail of relationships you've left behind. Were they balanced? Were you seen? Or were you only useful? Look at your body. Is it tired? Is it carrying the weight of unspoken truth? Look at your joy. Do you trust it? Or do you wait for it to vanish? These are not indictments. These are openings. Each question is a key. The truth is this: the suffering you feel is not your enemy, but your addiction to it is. And so we must ask what lies beneath the addiction. Often it is shame, a deep generational shame. The shame of being too much or not enough, the shame of feeling everything when others feel nothing, the shame of being the emotional one. And shame has a cunning way of disguising itself. It wears the robes of humility, of helpfulness, of empathy. But underneath, it whispers, you are only good when you are suffering for someone else. This is a lie. You are good. You are worthy. You are real, even when you are not rescuing anyone. But to believe this, you must confront the archetypal parent that still lives in your unconscious. For many empaths, the true addiction is not to pain, but to being chosen by someone who never truly saw them. The inner child still longs for the day the emotionally unavailable mother suddenly becomes nurturing, or the volatile father finally offers safety. And so you choose lovers who are emotionally absent and try to awaken them. You become the emotional caretaker, hoping that if you love them enough, they will finally love you back. But this is not healing. This is repetition. You are not loving them. You are reenacting the trauma in dreams. This often appears as a house with many doors, rooms you didn't know existed, people who enter without knocking. This is the symbol of your psyche. Unguarded, invaded. The dream is telling you your boundaries have been breached. You are not home in yourself. To heal, you must become sovereign. You must become the architect of your own inner castle. not a fortress, but a temple. A place where your sensitivity is honored, not exploited, where your compassion flows, but is not bled dry, where your intuition guides you toward wholeness, not toward martyrdom. This requires what the mystics call the second birth. The first birth is into the world, the second is into the self. And this second birth is not gentle. It comes through fire, through tears, through the slow, painful unlearning of who you thought you had to be. It requires solitude, silence, shadow work, the courage to sit with your own pain without turning it into someone else's healing. You must ask yourself, who am I when no one needs me? Who am I when I am not fixing? Who am I when I am not suffering? Most cannot answer. They panic. They rush to find someone to save. But if you can stay in that discomfort, if you can resist the urge to rescue something, miraculous happens. The true self emerges. Not the persona, not the role, not the mask, but the ancient, wild, sacred being who has been waiting beneath the noise. This self does not need pain to feel real. This self does not seek validation through sacrifice. This self does not chase unavailable people. This self knows that to feel deeply is a gift, but not an obligation. You see, healing for the empath is not about becoming less sensitive. It is about becoming more discerning. It is about knowing when a feeling is yours and when it is not. It is about listening to your body, the tightening of your gut, the heaviness in your chest, the buzzing behind your eyes, and honoring what it tells you. Your body is not a battlefield. It is a barometer. Trust it. Let me speak to you now of anger. Most empaths feel it. They see it as violence. But anger, in its sacred form, is a guardian. It tells you when your boundaries have been crossed. It tells you when your soul has been silenced. You must reclaim your anger. Let it rise, not as a weapon, but as a shield. Let it tell you where you end and where others begin. The empath who cannot access their anger is the empath who will always be used. But when you reclaim it, when you allow that fire to burn away the false belief that love must hurt you, become free. You become clear, you become whole. Do not fear this process. It is not the end of your sensitivity. It is the sanctification of it. You will still feel, you will still love, but you will no longer bleed for people who would never offer you a bandage. You are not a wound. You are not a mirror for other people's projections. You are not a bottomless well for other people's grief. You are a sovereign soul. You are a vessel for beauty, for vision, for truth. But first, you must be empty. You must pour out all the suffering that was never used to hold. This is the sacred purge, the alchemical death before rebirth. It is messy, it is frightening, it is lonely, but it is the only path to freedom, and on the other side, you will find something unexpected. You will find joy that is not tinged with guilt. You will find peace that does not demand sacrifice. You will find relationships where you are loved for your being, not your bleeding. This is not a fantasy, this is your birthright. But to claim it, you must let go of who suffering taught you to be. You must grieve her, thank her, and let her for beyond the pain, beyond the addiction, beyond the mask, there waits a life you have not yet lived, and it is time. There is a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when an empath finally realizes that not every emotion that floods their system belongs to them. That moment is like the cracking of an ancient mirror. It is disorienting, even painful, but it is the first glimpse of freedom. You begin to question everything. The exhaustion, once assumed to be your nature, is seen for what it truly is, the result of constant psychic labor. The sorrow that visits you without warning, once mistaken for intuition, is revealed as residual energy you've absorbed from others. And the love you believed you were receiving was, in truth, a transaction, your empathy traded for fragments of connection. This awakening is not gentle, it is not romantic, it is a dismantling. Your ego resists, your identity, built so carefully on the scaffolding of martyrdom, begins to tremble. You may weep, you may rage, you may feel as if you are losing yourself, and in a way you are, but what you are losing is not the self, it is the false self, the persona you created to survive, the empathic mask that made you palatable, useful, harmless, the one who knew how to nod at the right time, to cry for others but never for herself, to shrink in the presence of anger and expand in the presence of need. You were not born this way. You were trained. You were shaped. You were taught that love is given when you suffer beautifully. And so you learn to do just that, to suffer with grace, to smile while bleeding, to stay when you should have run. But now the spell is breaking. You begin to ask, what if I am not responsible for everyone's emotions? What if love does not require sacrifice? What if boundaries are not cruelty, but clarity? And as these questions rise like incense in the temple of your soul, you start to see the hidden architecture of your suffering. You were conditioned to believe that your sensitivity was a liability, and so you turned it into performance. You made it a gift to others, always others, never to yourself. You became the therapist, the healer, the listener. You became irreplaceable, but only in your function, never in your being. This is the great tragedy of the unawakened empath. They are praised for their warmth, but no one checks if their fire is burning them from within. They are surrounded, but unknown, needed, but never truly met, celebrated for what they give, but punished the moment they ask for something in return. And yet, deep within you, there is another voice, faint at first, but growing louder. It says, what if I am allowed to rest? What if I can say no? What if I can feel without fixing? This is the voice of your emerging self, the sacred stranger, the ancient archetype that was buried beneath the rubble of everyone else's expectations. But hear me, well, the world will not applaud your emergence. Those who benefited from your silence will resent your voice. Those who fed off your compassion will rage when you withhold it. The systems that kept you compliant will shake when you refuse to play your part. This is not a failure. This is a sign you are healing. You see, individuation is not simply a process of becoming whole, it is a revolt against fragmentation. It is a radical act in a world that demands you conform And for the empath, individuation often feels like betrayal. Not because it is wrong, but because your nervous system was trained to equate abandonment with danger, and setting a boundary feels like abandoning someone, but it is not. It is returning to yourself. The dream world, that ancient theater of the soul, begins to shift as you heal, where once you dreamt of chaos, water, strangers invading your home, now you begin to dream of thresholds, doors. You lock animals that protect you. These are symbols of your inner restructuring. The unconscious is telling you the self is returning, and with this return comes a strange grief. You mourn the years you spent bleeding for people who never asked you to stop. You mourn the relationships built on your invisibility. You mourn the parts of yourself that you exiled just to be loved. But this grief is sacred. It is not the grief of regret. It is the grief of rebirth. It is the cry of the phoenix as it rises from the flame. Let it wash over you. Do not rush it. For in that morning, you reclaim your timeline. You gather the scattered fragments of your soul and begin the work of integration. This work is not linear. You will regress, you will doubt, you will be tempted to return to the familiar agony of emotional entanglement. And when you do, be gentle. The addiction to suffering does not vanish overnight. It is dismantled piece by piece through presence, through awareness, through choice. Each time you choose peace over chaos. Each time you choose to feel your own emotions instead of absorbing another's. Each time you choose rest over performance, you are rewiring centuries of programming. This is not just personal work. It is ancestral, generational, archetypal. You are not healing only for yourself. You are healing for every empath who came before you, who could not speak, who died in the role of the helper, the fixer, the emotional servant. You are breaking a lineage of silent suffering. You are becoming what they could not, and the world needs this version of you, not the drained, broken, endlessly giving version, but the sovereign, grounded, vibrant empath who knows where they end and where others begin. The empath who can sit with pain without absorbing it. The empath who can offer love without self-erasure. The empath who is not addicted to the wound, but devoted to wholeness. This is the new archetype, rising a marriage of the mystic and the warrior, the one who sees beyond the veil, but who also holds the sword of truth, not to harm, but to defend what is sacred. That sword is your boundary. That veil is your vision. And you, at last, are home in yourself. To live from this place, from the rooted center of your own soul, is to begin again. It is to become intimate with the mystery of who you truly are beneath the survival script. The empath's journey is not one of erasing sensitivity. No, it is one of sanctifying it, of purifying it, of compulsion, addiction, performance. Only then can it become what it was always meant to be, a sacred gift, not a bleeding wound. But to offer that gift rightly, you must be anchored. Otherwise, your empathy becomes a trap for both you and those around you. You become a net that entangles instead of a mirror that reflects. True empathy does not require absorption. It requires presence. It requires the ability to stand rooted in your own body while witnessing another's pain. This is not detachment. This is union without enmeshment. This is compassion without collapse. The mystics knew this. They spoke often of the hollow reed, the empty vessel, not empty in the sense of lack, but emptied of egoic interference, emptied of the need to fix, to save, to earn worth. The awakened empath is like this reed. Spirit flows through them, not because they strain, but because they are surrendered. You cannot surrender when you are addicted to control. And what is suffering? If not a form of control. A way to keep yourself in the known. A way to avoid the terror of your own expansion. Yes, this is what I must tell you now. There is a fear that lives beneath the addiction to suffering. A primal, bone-deep fear of expansion, of bigness, of radiance. Because if you were to become all of yourself, if you were to claim your sovereignty, who might you lose? The child within you fears that if you stop suffering, you will be abandoned. That your healing will threaten the delicate dance you've performed to earn scraps of love. That your fullness will intimidate and your boundaries will be punished. And perhaps some will fall away, some will call you cold, others will say you've changed. Let them. You are not here to be digestible. You are not here to contort yourself into the shape others prefer. You are here to become whole. And wholeness is not always comfortable. It is not always praised, but it is holy. I have seen this in patients who, upon beginning to reclaim themselves, reported dreams of ancient temples, of reawakening, of forgotten names being spoken aloud again. These are not fictions. These are the soul's way of saying, you are returning to what? To the archetype beneath the trauma, to the self that was never wounded, only hidden, to the eternal flame of consciousness that flickered gently beneath all the noise, and from this flame you begin to create a new life, one where love is not earned through pain, one where boundaries are sacred, not shameful, one where your emotions are your own and you honor them without apology, one where stillness no longer feels like death, but like the womb of your becoming. This is what I call psychic sovereignty. Not invulnerability, but integrity. Not isolation, but individuation. Not self-protection born of fear, but self-containment, born of reverence. You were not made to be a sponge. You were made to be a prism, not to absorb all things, but to refract truth in your own color. And when you live from this place, when you give from overflow, not depletion, your relationships shift. You no longer tolerate the ones that feed off your wounds. You begin to attract those who recognize your wholeness, not just your usefulness. You become less interested in being understood and more devoted to being authentic. This is the great reversal. The wounded empath is addicted to being understood because they were never seen. The healed empath is devoted to truth because they have finally seen themselves. And in that clarity, your suffering ends not because pain disappears, but because pain is no longer your compass. your identity, your offering. You may still feel deeply. Of course you will. You are a vessel of soul, but you will no longer drown in other people's oceans. You will no longer mistake their storms for your weather. You will sit beside them. If they ask, you will love them, but you will not lose yourself in them. This is compassion with a spine. This is empathy that has come home, and it is beautiful. Oh, it is beautiful, because now, finally, you have space for your own joy, for your own becoming, for your own healing, not as a project, not as penance, but as your natural state. You will find yourself laughing more, not because life has grown easier, but because you are no longer carrying 10 lives inside your nervous system. You will find yourself resting more, not because there is nothing to do, but because you no longer believe you must earn your right to exist. You will find yourself choosing peace, not because you fear conflict, but because chaos is no longer familiar, no longer seductive, no longer needed. And in that peace, the true magic begins. The empath who is no longer addicted to suffering becomes a channel for healing, not through self-sacrifice, but through presence, through embodiment, through their very being. They become the oracle who does not bleed, the healer who does not shrink, the lover who does not lose themselves. They become whole. And this wholeness is what the world truly needs. Not more martyrs, not more emotional servants, but awake souls, fully present, deeply feeling, and yet sovereign. So I ask you now, in the silence, after the storm, are you willing to stop performing pain? Are you willing to stop translating your value through how much you can suffer? Are you willing to reclaim your life, not the one built on survival, but the one that emerges from soul? You have always known the answer. You've heard it in your dreams, felt it in your bones, whispered it in your prayers. And now, at last, you are ready to live it. So bless your sensitivity, honor your feeling, but no longer abandon yourself, no longer mistake absorption for love, no longer confuse self-erasure for compassion. You are allowed to feel, you are allowed to rest, you are allowed to rise, you are allowed to say, I will no longer suffer for connection. I will no longer betray myself for love. I choose wholeness. I choose me. And in that choice, you end the cycle, you break the spell, you step finally into the fullness of who you were always meant to be. A soul that sees clearly, feels deeply, and stands at last on its own sacred ground.